Hi guys, I am absolutely blown away by the quality of autofocus lenses that you can now get for the APS-C cameras that are under $200. There have been advances in technology, so making those little stepping motors much more accurate, much more reliable, that is something that companies are now doing, and it is also easier to make the glass for these companies, so you see the prices lowering on certain types of lenses. And all of the lenses that I'm going to mention are prime lenses, as in they are only one focal length. It is much more difficult to make a lower cost zoom lens, but there is one zoom lens on the list, but it may disappoint you. We will find out. Let's start with a real beauty here. This is the Viltrox 56mm f1.7. Now, traditionally, the 56mm focal length on an APS-C camera, that is something people really like for head and shoulder shots. For those portraits, you get that nice blurry background. Your subject will pop out, and this lens is excellent for that. As well, for me, street photography, I really like a 56mm on APS-C for street photography because I can stand a little bit back from the action. Other people will also choose this for food photography, things like that, because you can get a pretty close field of view. A 56mm is one of the first lenses that I would suggest people buy when they have an APS-C camera, because you can get those wow pictures where everyone says, wow, look at that. That is a real camera. Fantastic job. And you're like, it's because I have a portrait lens. This is an extremely sharp lens. You can pixel peep all you want, zoom all the way in. A wonderfully sharp lens with also excellent autofocus. It grabs the subject very quickly, no hesitation, no fluttering whatsoever. Viltrox have done a wonderful job with these ultra budget lenses. They call it the Air series, and you will see that they have the same housing for, at this point, 4 different lenses, and I believe they will be making more. 2 APS-C that I'll be talking about in this video, and 2 full frame that I'll be talking about in my full frame roundup of lower priced lenses. But this one right here is just such a great lens. Has almost no lateral chromatic aberration as well as longitudinal chromatic aberration. The build quality, very, very simple. A really light lens at 182 grams, just a focus ring on there, and a plastic lens all around with a plastic petal lens hood. But all you need is the quality and the size of this guy. Walk around with this lens all day long. A fantastic portrait lens from a company that is doing excellent things, not just in the ultra budget line, but the Pro line as well. At the time of recording this, the 56 1.7 is $179, so that is a steal among steals for this quality of lens. However, our Viltrox has some very stiff competition with our next lens, and this is the Meike 55mm f1.4. So it's very close in focal length, 55mm instead of 56, and it has a 1.4, so it lets in even more light to get an even blurrier background than the Viltrox f1.7. Not a ton more, f1.4 versus f1.7, but still, every little bit of light counts, and optically, it is really quite on par with that Viltrox lens. As you can see, I put the Viltrox lens away. The Viltrox lens, if I take off the hood here, is much smaller than the Meike lens, which is not a big lens by any stretch of the imagination. However, it's certainly notable to say that the Viltrox lens is a smaller, lighter carrier. And besides having a lower f-stop, the Meike is also a much better built lens. It is made of plastic like the Viltrox, but it is a harder plastic. It feels like a more solid lens. It has an autofocus to manual focus switch and an aperture ring. It is a clicky aperture ring. It cannot be declicked, but it's really great to have an aperture ring. So you get amazing optical quality as well. You get really great autofocus that is snappy and not hesitant. And you also get really nice pictures that are sharp and have great contrast. It's also good with chromatic aberration. So another really, really solid performer when it comes to optics, but you just have to decide what you want out of a lens in terms of build quality. And this one is a little bit pricier than the Viltrox. This is $199, so you do have to pay a little bit more for those extra features. But if the main concern with getting a portrait lens is to get a good quality lens at the lowest possible price, then the 56mm f1.8 from TTartisan, it is hard to beat this lens. Again, very good, reliable autofocus. Performance-wise, it almost keeps up with the Viltrox and the Meike lens. And it has a really nice build because it is a metal lens. It doesn't have any bells or whistles, no aperture ring, no buttons or switches. but it does have a very smooth turning metal focus ring. It feels really good. It feels like those older Sony lenses, like the 35mm f1.8. A really premium feel when you are using this lens, and a unique look that I certainly like, this crushed can pedal lens hood. I think that looks really, really unique and kind of cool on my APS-C cameras. And this lens is a remarkable $129. So if you want a great portrait lens on a budget, the TTartisan is definitely one to look at. The other two lenses are wonderful as well, and if you have a little more to spend, I might choose the Viltrox or the Meike. However, you won't be disappointed if you pick up the TTartisan 56 1.8. Now moving on to arguably the most popular focal length for APS-C cameras. That's between about 30 and 35 millimeters. That is the best-selling focal length when it comes to APS-C cameras, because you get close to that nifty 50 look that you would get on a full-frame camera. And these lenses are not that expensive to make. That's why there's going to be a couple on this list. In fact, there are three, and one is from Viltrox, the Viltrox Air here, the 35mm f1.7. This is a brand new release. It's got the same housing as the 56mm f1.7, and it shares some of the same benefits of that 56 in that it is small and light and optically absolutely fantastic. The people over at Viltrox are doing great things with lenses. This 35 is no exception. It is very sharp. It is snappy when it comes to autofocus, very reliable autofocus. This is an excellent lens when it comes to street photography, or if you're doing general videography. You could even do talking head shots like this if you had a little more room in your studio. Right now I'm using about a 15mm on my FX30, but you could use a 35. If you backed it up, you had the camera about 15-20 feet from you, you would be able to get this type of shot. So a popular focal length when it comes to video, especially people who like to use gimbals, they often use a 35mm, and something like this would be great for that. And of course, photography, to get that slice of life, to get that travel photography feel. And at f1.7, you can really let in a lot of light, so that's great in low light situations and also when you want to get a blurry background. But once again, not to be outdone, Meike has come out swinging with a 33mm f1.4. So very similar to the situation we have at 55 and 56mm, we have 35mm and 33mm. And the same thing applies. We have an autofocus to manual focus switch. We have an aperture ring that is clicky on this 33mm. It's a better built lens, more solid, with some better weather sealing on the back with this nice red ring, and it is just an exceptional lens as well. Very sharp, great autofocus, on par with the Viltrox in terms of optical quality, but it is a bit bigger and heavier, and also, once again, more expensive. The same prices as last time as well, $179 for the Viltrox and $199 for the Meike lens. And hold your horses, just like before, TTartisan has come out with their own 35mm. This is the 35mm f1.8. Now, a caveat here is that this is the original version of the TTartisan's 35mm f1.8. They actually have released a version 2 which improves upon this lens. It is shorter, smaller, lighter than this particular lens, and as you can see, it's already a pretty small lens, and apparently it is better in most of the categories. And this lens is $129. The new version, the version 2, is $129. Now, optically, this lens, and even the tests I've seen of the new lens, I am getting it in, and I will be testing it as soon as I can. However, from the tests that I have seen online, as well as my experience with the original, it doesn't really hold up when you compare it to the Viltrox and the Meike of the same focal length. But the price is right at $129, and it's still not a bad lens. But if you want the ultimate in optical quality, I would go with the Viltrox or the Meike lens. Still, you still won't be disappointed with this 35 f1.8. It will get the job done. It still has my favorite feel out of these three lenses, with that nice metal build and that turning metal focus ring. I always love the way this looks. Now, this no longer has a crushed canned lens hood, which, I don't know, may be a bit disappointing to me, but still, the new lens hood is squared off, and it also looks pretty cool, and you can reverse the new lens hood, so that's kind of a benefit, really. So that they seem to be going in that direction. TTartisan but an embarrassment of riches with the 30 to 35 millimeter focal length with these three lenses right here. Now let's look at a couple of almost pancake style lenses, and these are very popular for people who want a really compact setup. You want to just put a little tiny lens on your APS-C camera, take it around. It is basically pocketable at that point, or pocketable if you have decent sized pockets. And as you can see right here, this one is the TTartisan 27 f2.8, and this one here is the 7Artisan f2.8, and the 7Artisan is a bit bigger than the TTartisan, but is still a very small lens. So if you have a nice compact APS-C camera, this is my A6700. Like, look at that. Look at how small that is. So it's fantastic to walk around and shoot with these particular lenses. 27 millimeters is a great all-around focal length for an APS-C camera, so you get fairly true to life looking photos. Very good for travel, very good for family vacations. You can even do a little portrait work with it, and you can do a little bit of landscape. It's just that nice in between a wide focal length and a tight focal length. And the optical performance of these lenses doesn't quite keep up with the ones that I have mentioned so far. They still perform quite well optically, but they're an f2.8, so they let in way less light than the other lenses that we've mentioned. And it's also a little slower to get autofocus with both of these lenses. Still reliable autofocus, but not that snappiness that we have seen with the other lenses. The f2.8 is still better than something like a kit lens. If you're using the Sony 16 to 50 kit lens at 27 millimeters, that gets you an f4.5. So an f2.8 is much better than that f4.5 when you're walking around in terms of versatility and low light performance. Both of these lenses can take really great pictures. You do have to watch out for some bad flaring and ghosting if you get too many bright lights or you get the sun streaming straight into the center of your lens. These will let you down in those situations. However, for your day-to-day shooting, they can do a really wonderful job. I prefer the build quality of the TTartisan because it does have an aperture ring, and I do love that aperture ring on this compact little lens, and it is a smaller, lighter lens than the 7Artisan. However, I do find that the 7Artisan straight out of camera takes slightly better photos than the TTartisan. It just has more contrast and has less of that washed out look when bright lights are in your photos. The price right now that I see for the 7Artisan is $129 and $159 for the TTartisan. The TTartisan is available on the Sony E, the Nikon Z, and the Fuji X, whereas the 7Artisan is only available on the Sony E and the Nikon Z. Now, I should mention, if you're surfing Amazon, you may find other 27mm lenses that are under $200 as well. Newer sells one, Pergear sells one, and a company called Jintu, I think, sells one, and they all appear to be the same 27mm f2.8, and since they are one-offs by those particular companies in terms of autofocus lenses, I figured we wouldn't include them in this video because it's a safe bet that TTartisan and 7Artisan make a better quality lens than that particular generic brand lens. This entry here is the only entry from the Yongnuo brand. Now, Yongnuo do make some really great lenses, but they just happen to be a little bit over $200, with the exception of this 50mm lens right here. This is a 50mm f1.8 lens, and this one is the version 2 of the lens. They have the version 1 for Nikon and Fuji, but the Sony came out with a version 2, and I just really love this lens. I know it's similar to the portrait lens category in terms of focal length, but it does make a little bit of a difference that it's 50mm. I find it just more of a standard travel lens. I just took this little fella to Newfoundland. I took my A6700 and this lens. That is all I took because I was just fatigued from trying to choose lenses and from trying to carry around so much gear. I just wanted a nice, simple vacation. And look at this right here. My goodness, it was just such a pleasure to walk around and take photos with this lens and this camera, so small and lightweight, and it really just got me some excellent photos. No bells, no whistles, just a plastic turning focus ring, and there's something special about the quality that comes out of this guy. And when you consider that this costs $119, I think you can forgive it for not being quite as clinically sharp as that Viltrox 56mm f1.7. This is just a really delightful lens at an even more delightful price. We're on to the only zoom lens on this list, and that is the Sony 16-50 f3.5 to 5.6. It was the original kit lens for the Sony APS-C cameras. You see, they've come out with a new kit lens with the ZV-E10 Mark II that has a slightly better build quality, is not quite as noisy and rickety, but optically it is about the same. And you can get this guy here for usually $130, $140, even if you don't buy the camera. If you buy a camera like the ZV-E10, the original, it will come bundled with it for an extra $100. And I want to say that the kit lens is not going to be your favorite lens when the dust settles. It's not particularly sharp. Its autofocus works a bit slowly, and it certainly makes a fair bit of noise when you turn it on and off. Little bit of clanking back and forth. And sometimes when people buy the ZV-E10, because I'm often having the ZV-E10 on the channel, people say, should it rattle around? My lens is rattling. Is it broken? Listen to this. It's not broken, it's just rattly. But a kit lens is still a very versatile lens. That's why it comes with a camera system, because 16-50, that wide end 16, like I am shooting right now on a 15, so I'd be able to get this field of view in my shot. It would be at an f3.5 instead of an f2 like I am using, but still you can do that. The widest lens that I've mentioned here in this video is 27 millimeters. So that 16 could be very useful for someone who needs a wider type of lens. And at 50 millimeters, even though it's at f5.6 at that point, you can still back up and get some decent portraits with some nice background blur. What I find a kit lens is really good for is to figure out how you like to shoot. So you work for a while with your kit lens, and then you'll notice, oh, I'm always at 16 millimeters, or I'm always at 30 millimeters. And you figure out what type of shooter you are, and then you can invest in more expensive glass that will make you feel a bit better about your photos once you learn where you like to shoot. Now, of course, Nikon and Fuji have their own kit lens, so if you're buying one of those cameras, you can get one bundled with your camera, usually for an extra $100. And I do think the Nikon and Fuji kit lenses are a little bit better than this Sony lens, but if you try to buy the Nikon and Fuji without the camera, you probably won't get it as cheap as this Sony lens. Now, if you have enough in your budget and you want a really great replacement for a kit lens, then I would suggest the Sigma 18-50 f2.8. It is much more expensive than anything we have mentioned in this video. However, it is worth it if you want a nice quality zoom lens. Something to remember as well is that prices can fluctuate with sales and promotion, as well as being different prices in different parts of the world. So I will do my best to put links down below of the best deals that I can find on all of these lenses. It is easier to make certain focal lengths than other focal lengths. You will find about between the 20 millimeter and 56 millimeter focal lengths. That is the sweet spot for lens companies to be able to make really low priced autofocus lenses that are still really good quality. Canon, unfortunately, at this point does not have any autofocus lenses for their APS-C system that are under $200. The closest is the Sigma 30 millimeter f1.4. That will be the cheapest autofocus lens that you can find for the Canon R-mount system. So if you own any of these lenses, write them in the comments below with your experience so that we can all benefit from your knowledge. And if you see other lenses that are under $200, be sure to list them below as well. Anyway, thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.